So now we move on to the next chessman, that is pawn, the little foot soldiers. And in comparison to the 5 chessmen, of course I have yet to explain the king, which is last, but let us take in comparison to other chessmen, the pawn has a distinct way of moving and capturing. Let us learn this. The first one, the pawn, unless his path is obstructed, can only move forward straight on its file at a time. That means normally it moves one square forward on its file straight. As an exception to the first rule, each of the pawn in the starting position, unless obstructed, are also allowed to move 2 squares at once. It also means that once the pawn is no longer in the starting position, it means it has already moved, then it means it can only move 1 square forward. So like you see this here, 8 white pawns. So each of these 8 pawns, they have a choice of moving either 1 square or 2 square from the starting. So if it is my choice, if I want to take this pawn and move 2 squares, allowed. And now it's turn of black and he says I want to move my pawn 2 square. Yes, it is allowed. Okay. And say here now I decide I want to move this pawn 1 square. Yes, it is allowed. And black decides I want to move 2 squares. That is also allowed. So you have to remember that pawns only move in a forward direction. They cannot come back. Say I moved this pawn and say black has moved this and now I want to say no, I should have moved my pawn only 1 square. I don't have that choice of going back here. Not allowed. Okay, so pawn moves only in a forward direction. And remember this, that from the starting position, each of the pawn can either go 2 squares or 1 square. Thereafter, once it has moved, it can only go in a forward line. It can never come back. It does not change line. So this is what you have to remember. And now here in this diagram before you, position before you, white has already moved his pawn 2 square. It's now on this square here, and black, who is now on the choice, has can move any of his 8 pawns either 1 square or 2 square forward, which I have marked 1 square in yellow color and green in 2 color. So it is up to you like what you want to move. You can either move this pawn 2 squares, or if you want, no, I don't want to move 2 square, I want to move only 1 square. That is also allowed. And now again to recount that pawn is the only chessman that is limited to moving in a forward direction and is not allowed to move backward. I told you of this, pawns only move forward. Pieces, well, like rook, if you have taken say 3 squares forward and then you realize, oh, I should have taken it only 2 squares forward, then you have a choice at least on the next move to bring it back, but not with the pawn. Once they move forward, your choice is over. It cannot come back. It only will move forward in that line unless it is obstructed. So here you see this white pawn which is under fire by this bishop. It's threatening to capture this pawn. So here this pawn does not have the ability of saving herself by moving backward. Not allowed. Cannot go onto this square backward. Of course, it can go in a forward line only. But here again then it will be captured by this pawn. And then one more thing about pawn, that unlike all other chessmen which moves in the same way and captures in the same way, it is different for pawn. Pawn captures in a different manner, only 1 square diagonally forward to its left or right. And that is why you can see it here, this pawn can either capture the bishop or it can capture the knight. And say for example, it has captured the knight, then it will move only on this line. Prior to the capture, it had a choice of even moving forward, not capturing anything. But you have to remember that pawn is the only chessman which, moves in a different way and captures in a different way. Pawn moves straight but does never capture straight. It captures one square diagonally to the left or right in a forward way. So these are the properties of pawn. And so continuing on that, we can see here this white pawn here. It can only capture this rook but does not have the power to capture this pawn here, black pawn. It cannot capture straight. That is what you have to remember. It is illegal. Pawn moves straight but can never capture straight. So learn to move pieces in a correct way. You have to remember how each of them. Do not make illegal moves. It means you have not understood the movement of the pieces. Learn as to how each of them moves. Learn as to how each of them capture. So only difficulty will arise with a pawn because pawn moves in a different way. Pawn moves only in a forward direction, one square at a time, excepting the starting when you also have the choice of moving two squares at a time. But pawns cannot come backward. It will only move in a forward direction. And as regards capture, the pawn will capture one square diagonally to the left or to the right. So here this pawn has a choice of only capturing the rook and not the black pawn. So from this we understand that pawns are the weakest because they are like very slow. They move only in a forward direction, one square at a time. Only exception is from the starting point where they have a choice of also moving two square. And we also see that pawns cannot move backward and capturing zone just limited to one square to the left or right. But pawn has been given one power which has not been given to other pieces, one unique power, and that is when a pawn reaches end of the chessboard, it can transform itself either to a queen, rook, bishop or knight of the same color. This is known as pawn promotion. In vast majority of cases, the pawn would be promoted to a queen. Why? Because queen is the strongest piece on the board, most powerful. This we have learned. In such case, the promotion is also called queening. Let us have a look at this. Look at this white pawn here. It has, started all the way from here and reached here. Or maybe, by capture it has reached at this position. And now, here when it reaches end of the chessboard, here you have a choice of promoting it, changing it immediately. It should be done immediately of the same color. So here it's white pawn. So player with the white pieces will either select a white queen, a white rook, a white bishop or a white knight. And as I said, in most of the cases, you will be going ahead with the queen because that is the strongest piece on the board. That is promotion. From a mere pawn, it has transformed itself to one of the strongest piece. And now it's turn of black. And here you can see this pawn here. It's also going to reach end of the board. And once it reaches here, has a choice of promoting to any of the four pieces which I have said. And again here, like you see, black promoting it to a queen. And basically you have to keep in mind that there is no restriction placed upon the number of pawn promotions. Theoretically, it is possible to have 9 queens on the board if you are able to promote all your 8 pawns and you still have the original queen. The choice, of course, is all yours. However, at the top level of chess tournament, there are not more than 1 or 2 promotions during a game. A rare example is the position before you where we see 3 queens each. Of course, this was also at a very good level. So, what we can conclude from this is that pawn is the least mobile of all the chessmen because like its slow movement, as I have said, it can only move in a forward direction, 1 square at a time. Only exception is from the starting square where it can move 2 square at once, and capturing zone limited to just 1 square to the left or right. But this power of promotion which has been endowed to the pawn when it reaches end of the board can transform itself into the most powerful piece. So friends, with this we conclude the learning of our fifth type of chessman, that is the pawn, and now we can move on to the last of the chessmen, that is king. I'll be back with the king in the next chapter. Bye for now. You have to also keep in mind that there is no restriction placed upon the number of pawn promotions. Theoretically, it is possible to have 9 queens on the board if you are able to promote all your 8 pawns and you still have the original queen. The choice is all yours. However, at the top level of chess tournaments, there are not more than 1 or 2 promotions during a game. A rare example is in the position before you, where we see 3 queens for each of the side. White is having 3 queens, and similarly black is also having 3 queens. So from what has been detailed here, we can conclude that pawn is the least mobile of all chessmen, but has been endowed with the power to transform itself into the most powerful piece. Sometimes the position on the chessboard demands that the pawn should be promoted to a rook or knight instead of a queen, mostly say to avoid stalemate or to create a knight fork or a double attack. Then such type of promotion is called under promotion. So you don't promote it to a queen, but you promote it to a rook or a knight. And of course, this you will learn, like when you will go for advanced learning as to why it is necessary to promote it to a rook or a knight instead of a queen. So the position before you is the most notable example of an under promotion. Basically, this position was, considered as drawn for nearly 200 years, and the winning idea was suggested by the Spanish priest named Saavedra, the 19th century priest, and he has become immortal, and therefore this position is referred to as Saavedra's position. And to win the game, white has only one move, that is promote this pawn to a rook, not to a queen. So of course, right now I'll not be explaining as to why white decided to promote this to a rook and how we can win and what would have happened if he had, promoted to a queen. That is of course for the later part, but you have to understand that there is an under promotion also. You have to decide what is the best promotion for you in certain positions. And let us examine one more example of under promotion here with white to play. And what do we see? That like black has tremendous advantage in terms of material. He has got a queen and a rook and 2 pawns, whereas white has nothing more than 4 pawns on the board. Of course, 1 pawn can promote, but like if he can capture the rook and promote it to a queen, but that would not be a good idea. Here, like white went ahead with the capture of the rook, but instead of taking the queen, the strongest piece, he opted for a knight. Why? As I told you, knight can create a double attack. We call it knight fork. So here in this position, we see this knight checking the king. It's 2.5. Here it's a check to the king. So king needs to move. When a king is attacked, it is called check. Of course, we will learn this in detail when we come to that chapter. But as of now, it is sufficient for me to describe that king is in check. He needs to move out of the check, and once he has moved out of the check, the knight here will capture the queen. So friends, with this we conclude our learning of knight, the fifth of the chessman, and now only the last is remaining, and that is the king. And once you understand as to how the king moves and captures and what are the rules and what is the objective of the game, then you will be in a position to play a real game of chess. So with this, I take your leave for now and will be back soon.